This is Dev Propulsion Labs, the podcast about building successful developer tools, hosted by evil Martians. Hi, this is Dev Propulsion Labs, and I'm your host, Victoria Milnikova. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. Please welcome Hahnbee Lee, co-founder at Mintlify. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the background. Hahnbee, do you want to introduce yourself and give us a bit of the context, who you are
Yeah,
and how you got here?
for sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Hahnbee. Thanks so much for having me, Victoria. I'm super excited. I kind of just like really jumped into software engineering and really just enjoyed coding. And I also just really enjoy working with other people and like working on problems that aren't just impactful problems that provide value to people. And I would say that like Duolingo also really enforced that into me because it was just such a fun product. And it was like the culture was so great and they would always talk about how we could be providing value to people. And I think that has like really been ingrained into me. Like I really enjoy working on products where I could really relate to the user. And so I think that's how I kind of really got into startups as well, because you're really on the ground and really trying to talk to your customers and figure out how you could be providing value to them.
Sounds pretty awesome. From Cornell University to Duolingo, then co-founding people, now Mintlify. It sounds like quite a journey. How have these roles shaped you? Maybe you can talk a little bit about each experience and what it gave you.
For sure. So I kind of already spoke about Duolingo. Like I was there when they IPO'd, but like when that happened, they were around like 300 people, and despite the fact that they were at that stage, it still felt very startup-esque. So like still very focused on the user, still very product oriented and experimental. So I would say I learned a lot from that. And I also really like their culture because it's super diverse and everybody knows another language, and it's just like the type of work environment that I want for my company as well. As for Cornell, I would say that I learned my computer science fundamentals and, was surrounded by like super, super smart people and super inspirational people. And I would say that I learned a lot from being surrounded by people who are that talented. And it's also where I met my co-founder, Han. Him and I also co-founded People Together, which was a community platform that we launched together. That was a very cool experience because I would say that he was into startups a lot more than I was. And so like I remember we were just like really going at it, really coding and trying to like figure out this product. And I remember at one point I was like, Han, why are we even doing this? And he was like, one day maybe we'll make a company together. And here we are now. So people always say that startup years are like, they feel really short, but like you learn a lot in that time period. And I would definitely say that's true because from working on our previous startup together and our startup now, I've definitely feel like I've grown a lot, not only technically, but like in business aspects and like professional aspects as well. There's just like so much to learn and grow. And so with Mintlify now, I'm constantly being challenged to, figure out new steps. People also say that like startups are kind of like a video game where each stage is just like a different boss and you just have to figure out how to like defeat that boss. And so I've definitely become a lot more flexible, a lot more open-minded in terms of the problems that we need to solve and tackle on a day-to-day basis and at a larger scale.
Sounds pretty awesome, and also sounds like a very kind of like intense experience, because you have to go through all those stages as you mentioned, which often feel like bad bosses in games, Dark Souls kind of bosses. But it all makes sense in the end, and the reward you get when you pass over certain like hurdles, that it makes it all worth it. I also want to share a quick story. So I recently interviewed Monica Sarbo, the co-founder of Zeta, and she was at Elastic when they went through IPO. So it's super cool to hear those kind of like parallel stories that happen sometime in like parallel universes. And she said that it's actually so rare to be at a company when they go through an IPO, especially in the current economic climate. And I'm so excited to have you both on this season because you both did that, and that's pretty pretty badass.
It was super exciting, and I was so grateful to be there to experience it. And hopefully one day I get to be at the table ringing the bell as well.
Take us to the origins of Mintlify. How did it come about?
When Han and I were co-founding People, we quickly realized after launching the product that we did not know much about like SMBs and like why they wanted to build a community and what they wanted to do with it. And we like quickly realized that we didn't like empathize with the end user as much as we wanted to. And so the next time that we got together to build a product, we knew we wanted to build developer tools because Han and I are both technical. And so we like at the very fundamentally, we could very much relate to developers. And so Mintlify originally started out with being a documentation generation platform where basically you select code and then it generates a doc string on top of it. And we came up with this because like we as developers did not like writing documentation. And so we just thought, oh, like this is, we think this could be useful. And that was proven correct because a lot of people still use this product up to this day. But we also quickly realized that individual developers have a very low willingness to pay. And so we decided to kind of move away from that product. But we are really thankful about DocWriter because it introduced us to the idea space of documentation. And we also got into YC with the idea. And when we were in YC, we started talking to other founders about documentation. And they kept on telling us that public-facing documentation is not solved. And for the longest time, we ignored that. We were like, oh, we're not doing public-facing documentation. Like, we already know that other competitors already exist in the space. But then one day we just tried doing it and we've kind of been running with it since. There's a clear need for it. I think that, the market was in the need of a disruption, and a lot of our customers right now are our fellow friends in our YC batch and YC in general. And we're continuously building and trying to advance with them.
Yeah, I mean, Y Combinator, it's one of those accelerators that put startups on the map, and it's a challenge to get in, but I think it's very rewarding in the end. So can you share a little bit more about your experience at YC?
When we applied, we were still students at the time, actually, and we told each other that we would drop out if we got in. And so I would definitely say that out of like our entire startup journey, I feel like getting into YC was definitely one of like the most like pivotal, like foundational moments of it. It definitely validated a lot of the work that we were doing up until then, where it kind of felt like we were really in the shadows trying to just like do whatever we can and just figuring it out without a lot of mentorship. And so like it was super gratifying and super validating to like get that acceptance. It was an amazing experience. We participated in the winter 2022 batch, and this was the last remote batch, although we did like fly to SF then just to see some other people and just experience San Francisco. Truly just having the group partners there to be a sounding board to tell them, hey, like we're thinking of doing this, and then them telling you whether they think that's a good or bad idea is so much guidance. Like there's like no right or wrong answer and when you're working on startups, but just knowing that they have so many data points and like they've obviously like they've all been successful founders themselves, it's just super invaluable. And I would also say that despite the fact that we were the last remote batch, we also met a ton of other people, and it's very rare that you find other founders that are at the exact same spot that you are at. And like, up until this day, we still like catch up every now and then with our fellow batchmates. And it's really nice that like we all obviously have different journeys, but just catching up, and like it's super motivating to be surrounded by like like-minded people, like-minded, but also like completely different and like completely diverse in terms of like what they're working on. And everyone is just like changing the world in a different way. So I highly recommend YC to anybody who's considering applying.
Yeah, and also they have some, free resources available. Like, I mean, we can start with Paul Graham's, essays, and we can finish with the YC Startup School videos that are really highly educational. And you can go onto YouTube, check YC videos, and it's just packed with great, useful information. We work with different founders, and we notice that, especially engineers, founders with the background in engineering, they often get carried away with building the technology, but the business aspect of it is really important. And sometimes you need guidance to kind of like understand what your next step is. And basic concepts like talking to your users and moving fast, some of those things that YC really teaches you to do.
100%.
It's also nice to have the YC, badge next to your name. It's just like a nice thing to have. All right, let's focus on Mintlify for a second. So,
yeah, for sure.
Developer tools is one of those industries that has specific go-to-market technologies, and actually documentation is extremely important for developer tools because it's one of those. It's kind of like the screen through which this startup communicates with their users. It's their first kind of like engagement with their users, right? And GitHub did the survey in 2017, pointing out that there is a huge problem with documentation. It's not easy to navigate. It's overbearing. There's a lot of things going on. And it's also, if you ask any developer how much time it takes to write documentation, it takes a ton of time. So it's extremely time consuming as well. How do you think the scene has changed since 2017? And what is Mintlify doing about those old challenges and the new challenges?
I like to think that we're making documentation more sexy. Like people are paying more attention to documentation. And like you said, it is like a super important part of a developer tool company's products, especially if you're an API company. At that point, the documentation is the product because it's really the one part that your users are really interacting with in order to use your API. One of the things that we like to say about Mintlify is that it's infinitely flexible and when you need it to customize it, but it's also opinionated so that you can, get your docs up and running as quickly as you can, but also still match your branding and still be up to par with the rest of your product. And so we're super developer centric. Our product essentially connects to your GitHub and uses markdown files that live inside a GitHub repo, and it automatically syncs with the website automatically syncs with your GitHub repo with the content. And so it's super convenient for developers to use and maintain. And we're also big on developers maintaining the documentation since it's for a technical audience, and we think that developers are know the product, are very close to it, and think it's important that developers can easily access and maintain it.
Yeah, empathy is huge, honestly, especially in developer tool space. Developer experience is something that is changing, disrupting the industry. Can you tell us about landing your first Mintlify users? So you mentioned how YC is kind of like a cheat code in that sense, because you get exposed to so many startups that are in the same batch. So you guys are kind of like comrades, so to say, right? So you're kind of like willing to test out each other's products. Can you share more about getting those first users? How did it happen? What do you guys do to get those first users, whether paying or not?
Yeah, no, the early days was super interesting because since we're both technical founders, we've had the mentality of if we have an idea, then we want to MVP it as quickly as possible and then throw it out there. And so the first version of Mintlify was basically just a static website that we maintained. Our first customer, they couldn't even edit the docs themselves. We manually migrated their content, and then we're like, hey, would you pay for this website? And then surprisingly they said yes. So that was the first version of Mintlify. And since then we've obviously added the automations so that you can sync it with GitHub, obviously edit the docs yourself. But the first few customers were a lot of the people we were closest with during YC. Thankfully, yeah, like you said, they were nice enough to test our product from the early days and use it. So that was a super interesting time, and a lot of manual work, like just doing things that don't scale, of like copying over content from their existing documentation to like be like, hey, like would like please like just check this out, and like if you like it, like feel free to use it, kind of thing.
Awesome. So documentation revolves around users. It's very important to take user feedback and apply it. How do you leverage feedback on documentation or in general, user feedback, to drive your product forward?
Yeah. Recently, for our customers themselves, like since they're also companies that should be listening to their customers, we recently launched a feature where you can, the user can like give like a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the documentation page. And then through our dashboard, you can see which pages that the users like and dislike, so that you can move from there. For ourselves, I think like everyone always says, like we probably don't talk to our customers enough, but like we have a community that we maintain, and always try to prioritize and make sure that our current customers are happy while we're iterating on the product. Like this is a good reminder that I should be scheduling more calls with our users to continuously like have that feedback loop into moving our product forward.
So Mintlify journey, or to be honest, any startup's journey is not linear, right? Ideas change based on what you're hearing from your users, things you kind of like adapt your product to meet, to get the market fit. Can you tell us about the pivots that Mintlify went through? How did you shape them? How did you find what's the next step for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I also kind of briefly touched upon this before, but like I said, we were working on a more B2D product directly to the developer before we started working on the B2B product that we're working on now. Since then, we've also we had a couple pivots before that product, a couple pivots in between, but just a lot of iteration, a lot of just not being afraid to throw something out there and put it out into the world just to get that reception. We also have like the mindset that everything is like kind of a hypothesis until you get the market reaction out there. If somebody believes in an idea more than the other, then we still support each other, and we're like, okay, like let's admit that we don't know like how the market's going to react to this. Like let's just see what's going to happen after we throw it out there. And so like we've definitely been through a lot of pivots. And I know like the age-old question is like, oh, like how do you know if you're pivoting too much or not enough, or like too early or too slow? And like obviously, we'll never know the answer to that, and it's different per person. But we're of the opinion that like people, or I think most people are of the opinion that people don't pivot fast enough because they're a little bit too attached to their product. But I actually remember one of our first office hours with YC, like we were contemplating going through a pivot because we applied with another idea, but it wasn't really working out. And then we had the doc writer idea, and we asked them what we should do. Like, we're thinking of pivoting, we're not sure. And then I remember their advice was like, don't be too attached to the product. And that has stuck with me really it has really stuck with me because I feel like the media perception of startups is kind of like Facebook, where it's like, oh, like they just launched this product and it worked. It just blew up and like everybody loved it. But that's like so far away from reality. Like it requires so much like just throwing things at the board and just a bunch of different like tries until you get it to work. And the product is just like a means to get to the customer. Like you're really just trying to provide value in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't even have to be software. You're just trying to provide value. And so like being attached to the code or like the physical product is like really does you more harm than good in the long run. So that's still my mindset now, that like we're just trying to provide value to the customer.
I think that's going to be the insight that I take away from this conversation. Just that alone is something that I think a lot of founders need to adopt in their mentality, because it is a mentality shift. You know, you have to kind of like go to the next level of abstraction and think about it differently, which is hard to do, you know, especially when you spend so much time on the technology and you kind of like did so much work to make it happen, you know, so it's kind of counterintuitive but it actually, what makes startups successful at the end of the day. Like even big guys like Airbnb, originally they were a different idea that pivoted and became something else, So with Mintlify going big on the premium front, what should we expect next? What do you have in store?
We have been super focused on developers, but we also want to kind of expand our audience. And so we are currently working on a web-based editor so that non-technical parts of the team, such as designers or product managers, can also edit the documentation and be closer to it, because the more up-to-date and more people have the ability to do that, the better it is. Because I would say stale and incorrect documentation is worse than no documentation at all. So we're super excited for that. We're actually hoping on launching that next week. So fingers crossed that that happens. Looking even further on, I could really see us, going towards just being like a developer communication platform, where right now we're really focused on documentation, but there are other ways in which like you have to communicate with developers, such as like through change logs or status pages, or even like a public facing roadmap. And so I'm like super excited to kind of like expand our like feature set and hopefully go into more areas like that to help that communication happen between companies and their end users.
Sounds ambitious, and I like it. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
How is Mintlify engaging with open source communities? Do you have any cool collaborations, in your back pocket?
Yeah, so if any open source companies are watching this, we offer like a deal for specifically open source companies. So like they could reach out to us and we can help set up documentation for them. We love the open source community, and I obviously have benefited from it. Like myself, like there's just so many cool things on GitHub. And so we're, hoping to open source more of our code base as well, open source our components or like our parser in the future, so that other people can take advantage of that and use it in their code base if they would like to. Yeah, we've like big fan of open source and just want to continue to, support the community and give back as much as I can, and, work with anybody who, needs documentation, and we can just provide it for them. And I would say that our product is also super convenient for open source companies because of the fact that the documentation lives in the code base. It's super easy for their users to also go in and make a suggestion, because like everybody is technical and knows how to use GitHub in the open source community. And so that's definitely a way in which our product is designed to be in favor of open source companies.
Sounds pretty cool. I mean, for us at Evil Martians, we kind of invest a lot of time and resources into open source. And some famous open source frameworks are done by Evil Martians, created by Evil Martians, like PostCSS and NanoID, some pretty big open source projects. So I can definitely see how, open source community, especially early staged ones, could benefit from something like that for sure. Documentation is one of those things that's kind of like a lifeline for developers. It's extremely important. Do you have any gold nuggets of advice for techies who are trying to solve similar type problems, similar to what you're doing with Mintlify?
Yeah, for sure. So I obviously spend a lot of my time thinking about documentation. And one of the things that I'd have to say, like, I would say documentation itself is a very hard problem because like people don't want to write it. And fundamentally, I wouldn't say that there is like a one size fits all solution to having great documentation. But I think one core thing that I learned about it is that like we're going to try to fix as many problems as we can, but some parts of it are fundamentally cultural, in that like I think a lot of the reasons why Stripe has amazing documentation is not only because of like the resources that they devote to it, but also because of like the strong writing culture that they have instilled in their company. And that's not something that you can just fix with a product. And so I think that's like something that's super important to be aware of fundamentally, because I know that there are a lot of other companies that try to fix documentation, specifically like, oh, like how do I prevent documentation from going stale? Or how do I, even like Mintlify right now is focused on public facing documentation, but for internal documentation within a company, like how do you make sure that everything is centralized, like discoverable, stays up to date? And no one disagrees that that isn't a problem. But also I wouldn't say that there is like that I could just sit here and conjure up a product that could fundamentally solve that like instantly. And so I think like that's kind of why we're working on like what Mintlify is working on now, which is like public facing documentation specifically, because, like we think that this is like a good problem space that we can focus on and is ripe for like problems to be fixed that we can fix, and also grow from there. And then hopefully, go into the larger cultural problems like here and there. But like we're start at like a lot of a smaller problem space than the vast one that exists. So I would say my advice is to kind of be aware of that. Like I think fundamentally you can try to fix like these larger problems. Like we've gone through it, and like, I guess you wouldn't know for sure whether you can fix it or not without trying. So I wouldn't discourage people from trying, but also like just to be aware of the fact that like it's not just a product that can solve these problems at times.
So would your advice be start with the smaller problem, like a specific problem that you're solving, and then try to approach the bigger fundamental issue, and just, kind of you have to make peace with the fact that it is possible that your product would not be solving the big issue.
Yeah, up to some extent. Because like, I think you also have to balance the fact that you have to be realistic with what you're capable of doing, with the whole other mindset that I was talking about of us iterating and MVPing quickly. Like, I think you have to be realistic about which problems you can solve in the time that you have. And so with those two constraints, I think that the best way to even inch towards thinking about those larger problems is to start smaller and grow towards them.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. Your journey as a female founder of color in tech is truly inspiring, especially in the developer tool space. It's pretty rare, as I mentioned, to come across female founders. And I'm sure for many people, it will open up doors, because sometimes it's enough for us to see just one role model that's going through it, to realize that that's even possible. So can you maybe share some words of encouragement to others from diverse backgrounds looking to venture into tech or startups or developer tools specifically?
Yeah, for sure. I love this question. It's definitely been quite an experience. Like it's definitely super male dominated. And as you said, in dev tools specifically, I would say that like there are definitely not as many female founders, but my words of encouragement, like you gotta kind of just throw yourself out there and do it. You can't be scared. I think that, people underestimate us, but like there's nothing that sets me different from the other people who are doing the same thing that I am. And so I will admit at times it is hard, like, being like walking into a room and it's like I'm the only woman there, but it's encouraging to me to know that I'm setting a precedent, and I'm hoping that, like you said, more people will be willing to, go into these positions and like, believe that they can do this themselves because other people are doing it as well. And so it's super fun and it's what I enjoy doing. And so like if there's other people out there that are scared of doing it but just want to go for it, like I also highly encourage people to reach out to me if they want advice or any sort of mentorship in this aspect, because I obviously want more diversity and more people, more women, more people of color in this space.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you. I like to end the episode with what I call a warm fuzzy. It's sharing something that makes you feel great about what you're doing at the moment. Can you share your warm fuzzy with us?
For me, I would say that what I love about what I'm doing is purely just like the people that I work with and the people that and our customers. Like, I love it when people tell us that our product is working well and they enjoy it, and like have that sort of validation where like, oh, like we are providing value. And so that's definitely what keeps me going.
Sounds awesome. Last but not least, can you give our audience a call to action, whether it's to test Mintlify for themselves or something else?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, check out Mintlify at mintlify.com if you need documentation for your product. Sign up, join our community, and I'll be more than willing to help people get set up. And yeah.
Thank you. This was awesome. Thank you for this episode. Thank you so much.
For sure. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you for catching yet another episode of Dev Propulsion Labs. We at Evil Martians transform growth stage startups into unicorns, build developer tools, and create open source products. If your developer tool needs help with product design, development, or SRE, visit evilmartians.com/devtools. See you in the next.